Could you see the rows?
Yes, sir.
Could you see the aisle?
Yes, sir.
Could you see people, like actual people sitting in the seats?
Yes, sir.
Could you see what they were doing?
Yes, sir.
May I approach with State's Exhibit number 6?
You may.
Actually, may I have the witness step down?
She may.
Briefly?
Rearrange if you need to. Do you have an objection?
I don't, but if we can just approach it.
Uh-huh.
Some of the jurors are having a hard time hearing her. She's going to ask to speak into the mic.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Position, Your Honor?
Yes,
Thank you.
May I have the witness step down briefly?
you may.
Can everybody see? I'm going to use this fancy pointer I'm going to give you. Okay. Your call where you were in the theater.
Yes, sir.
Just generally speaking, can you show the members of the jury where you were? Okay, so at the back row and then facing, I guess, the Cinepede store area up to the right.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, between the time that you sat down and eventually we're going to be talking about a shooting, were the lighting conditions the same?
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about the volume. When you sat down, how would you describe the volume of what was on the screen?
I mean, it was playing, but you could still have conversations.
Okay. Did you have any difficulty hearing your husband?
No, sir.
Could you hear other people talking?
You could hear conversations. You couldn't hear specifically what they were saying.
Okay. And were you paying attention to specifically what they were saying?
No, sir.
Is that the reason why you didn't know what they were saying?
Yes, sir.
But it was loud enough to hear a conversation.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And could you hear conversations and see other people that were 5, 6, 10 seats away?
Yes, sir.
Didn't have any difficulty seeing that?
No, sir.
Now, you indicated your husband was a deputy.
Yes, sir.
Did he have a firearm?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did he bring the firearm into the theater?
Yes, sir.
And did you hold it for him?
I did not hold it. He put it in my purse.
Okay. And what was the reason for that?
He just took it out of his holster to lean back and get comfortable.
Now, eventually there was a shooting, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you later on find out the names of the people that were involved?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The person that did the shooting, what did you learn his name was?
Curtis Reeves.
And the person that was shot, did you learn his name?
Chad Oulson.
All right. Did you know either of those people before January 13th?
No, sir.
Okay. So when we refer to them by name, it's just to make it easy for everyone to follow. You learned that later on.
Yes, sir.
In relation to you, where was the defendant Curtis Reeves sitting? Was he in the same row?
Yes, sir.
And to your right or to your left?
To my right.
Were they more towards the middle?
Yes, sir.
The person that was shot, you indicated that was Chad Oulson.
Yes, sir.
Where was he? Was he also in your row or a different row?
He was in a different row.
Okay, which row was he in?
This row in front of us.
Did you note whether or not there was anyone with Chad Oulson?
There was a female with him.
Did you later learn who she was?
Yes, sir.
And who was that?
His wife.
Now, at some point in time while you're sitting in the theater, does something turn your attention to the right? Something that you see or something that you hear?
Something that I see.
Okay. What is it that first brings your attention to your right, towards the middle of the theater?
I seen a gentleman get up and walk out.
Okay. And did you later find out who that person was?
Yes, sir.
And who was it?
Mr. Reeves.
Okay. Do you know why he got up and walked out?
No, sir.
Okay. You didn't have any knowledge about what was going on at that point in time.
No, sir.
At some point, did you see Mr. Reeves return?
Yes, sir.
Did you watch him the entire time?
No, sir.
You just know he came back into the theater.
Yes, sir.
After he came back into the theater, did you pay attention to the middle of the theater, or did you watch the previews again?
I went back to watching the previews.
Okay. Did something direct your attention away from the previews?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what was that?
The gentleman in front of him stood up.
Okay, so that would be Mr. Oulson.
Yes, sir.
And were you looking at Mr. Oulson, or was it just something that caught your eye?
It was just something that caught my eye.
Okay. And once it caught your eye, did you look in that direction?
Yes, sir.
Did you hear or see anything at that time when you looked over?
Mr. Oulson said something that he was texting his daughter.
Okay. Now, when he said that, which direction was he facing?
The gentleman in the road towards Mr. Reeves.
Okay, so Mr. Olson was facing Mr. Reeves when you made a comment about texting.
Yes, sir.
Okay, do you remember if there was, and I'm not going to say the word, but an F word in there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what you heard.
Yes, sir.
After you saw Mr. Olson stand up, what's the next thing that you see?
Popcorn fly.
Okay. Was that pretty quick after he stood up?
Yes, sir.
When you saw the popcorn fly, what was the next thing you saw?
Immediately after you heard the gunshot and saw the flash.
Okay, so going in an order, you saw Mr. Olson stand up and face Mr. Reeves, the defendant,
Yes, sir.
said something
Yes,
about
sir.
texting his daughter.
Yes, sir.
Immediately after that, popcorn,
Yes, sir.
and then immediately after that, the shooting.
Yes, sir.
At any time, did you see Mr. Olson literally climb over into what would be your row?
No, sir.
Did you ever see him taking his fist back and punching the
No.
defendant?
No, sir.
Did you ever hear him threatening, I'm going to kick your butt, and I mean the A word, I'm not saying it, I'm going to, threats to that extent?
No, sir.
Did you ever hear the defendant yelling and screaming and exclaiming as if he was being attacked?
No, sir.
Did you ever see a life and death struggle occurring before any shot fired?
No, sir.
Did you ever hear the defendant yelling, no, 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 or whoa, 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 or anything like that?
No, sir.
Did you see any objects go flying across the movie theater? Okay, not talking about the popcorn, but any other objects before that?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you ever hear the defendant exclaim anything as if he was hit by an object?
No, sir.
Did you ever see the defendant react as if he was just hit by something and he was incredibly injured?
No, sir.
At the time the shot was fired, do you recall what Chad Oulson's wife Nicole was doing?
She was there, but I don't recall exactly what she was doing.
After Mr. Oulson was shot, did you see what happened?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's first focus on Mr. Oulson. Did you see what he did?
I did not focus on where exactly he walked to, but he eventually fell to the ground.
Okay. After the shooting, did you look at the defendant?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Tell the jury what you saw him doing.
I walked over there to stand by my husband, and he was leaned back in the chair, rubbing his face and his head and his eyes.
Okay. And did your husband get up?
Yes,
Okay. And when was it in time, approximately, that your husband got up?
immediately when the popcorn flew and the gunshot, he got up and walked over there.
Okay, so after the gunshot is when he went over?
Yes,
All right. Did you have an opportunity to watch a video prior to testifying?
yes,
Okay. And did you see your husband getting up in that video and going over?
yes.
When your husband went over to the defendant, did he take any objects from him?
Yes, sir.
Do you know what that object was?
His gun.
Okay, when you say his gun, the defendant's gun?
Yes, sir.
All right. At some point in time, did your husband give that gun to a sergeant or someone with the sheriff's office?
Yes, sir.
Did you see Mrs. Oulson after that?
I didn't focus in on her. She was still in the theater.
Do you know what she was doing?
I could hear her
What did you-
crying.
Okay. Did there come a point in time when deputies from the sheriff's office arrived?
Yes,
Were you in the theater when that happened?
yes.
Did paramedics come?
Yes, I didn't focus in or see them,
Okay,
but I'm assuming, yes.
all right. Did there come a point in time when you were told to go to a specific area of the theater because there was going to be an investigation?
Yes,
Were you given a blank form? Sometimes people refer to these as written statements.
yes,
Did you fill out a written statement?
yes, sir.
Were you given any instructions on how much or how little to put in there?
No, sir.
Did you just put in the information that you thought was relevant for you?
Yes, sir.
Did there come a point in time on that particular day that a detective interviewed you as well?
Yes, sir.
Did you talk to other people about what you observed?
No, sir.
What you're testifying to, is that what you personally heard and what you personally observed?
Yes, sir.
When you gave your statement to the detective, was your husband in the room?
Yes, sir.
Did your husband help you in any way to give that statement?
No, sir.
Did he look at you, give you any funny looks like you're crazy, that's not what happened?
No, sir.
Were you in the room with him when he gave his statement?
No, sir.
Were you happy he was in the room with you?
Yes, sir.
And why is that?
Just comfort.
With respect to other patrons in the theater, were they kind of spread out when they were filling out the written statements?
Yes, sir.
Were you paying attention to what other people were saying or doing or anything like that?
No, sir.
May I have a moment, Your Honor? I don't have any further questions, thank you.
Thank you. Cross?
Okay, what I heard you testify to was that you worked for the school system? Is
Yes,
that
sir.
right?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
the public school system.
Yes, sir.
And I guess that you called in sick for Monday?
Yes, sir.
You actually did that via an app on Sunday night.
Yes, sir.
The reason I asked that, because the Monday we're talking about was the Monday you were out sick from school.
Yes, sir.
And the reason I'm asking that, because I want to know if you were suffering from some kind of illness that prevented you from seeing clearly,
No, sir.
okay, or hearing clearly,
No, sir.
or affected you in any way.
No, sir.
Okay, but you called in sick and you were at the theater with your husband.
Yes, sir.
Now, I know you had your husband's gun in your purse.
His gun was in my purse, yes.
And that's because he carries it behind him, right, when he's off duty?
Yes, sir.
Okay, he didn't want to lean on it.
Yes, sir.
Certainly it wasn't in your purse because you have a carry and concealed firearm license.
No, sir.
But your husband did bring his gun to the theater.
Yes, sir.
That's because when he's off duty, that's his habit. That's what he does.
Yes, sir.
One of the things your husband does is that you sat in the rear row of the theater, right?
Yes, sir.
And what your husband does, because he's an off-duty police officer, because he's trained law enforcement, when you go to restaurants, he likes to sit in the back so he can see everything.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that's kind of his habit, and now by marriage, your habit as well.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, when you got to the theater, it was dark, but not as dark as when the movies are playing.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And when you sat down, the previews were actually playing.
Previews or advertisements. Yes, sir.
And you were there when the sign came on, please turn off your cell phones.
Yes, sir.
Now, while you were there watching the previews, you heard a person talking to another person that distracted you, right?
Yes, sir.
And that person was, we came to know him as Mr. Oulson.
Yes, sir.
And the voice was loud. That person was raising his voice, right?
He was louder than a normal conversation. Yes, sir.
Well, the previews were loud, right?
You could still have conversations, but yes,
But you could hear Mr. Oulson's voice over the previews.
he was closer to. Yes, sir.
And what you heard Mr. Oulson say is something to the effect of, I am texting my effing daughter.
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Oulson's voice was raised. We've already agreed with that, right?
It was louder than normal. Yes.
Well, it wasn't a normal speaking voice.
No, sir.
I mean, you agree with me when somebody usually uses the F word while talking to somebody else, it's usually somebody who's agitated, right?
Yes, sir.
And so in this case, the voice was raised, right?
Louder than normal. Yes, sir.
And it was agitated.
Yes, sir.
You only heard one voice. You only heard Mr. Oulson's voice.
Yes, sir.
You didn't hear Mr. Reeves.
No, sir.
And when you first, that voice caught your attention, you looked to your right, right?
Yes, sir.
You saw a tall man standing.
Oh, yes, sir.
And that turned out to be Mr. Oulson.
Yes, sir.
Now that tall man was standing and he was facing Mr. Reeves.
Yes, sir.
So this man was agitated and angry, right?
Agitated. Yes.
Okay. He was using the F word,
Yes, sir.
and he was in a movie theater, but with his back towards the movie screen,
Yes, sir.
standing up, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now there was a woman next to Mr. Oulson that later became known to you as Mrs. Oulson.
Yes, sir.
Now, you remember that Mrs. Oulson was not looking at the movie screen, but instead was looking at her husband, Mr. Oulson, right?
Yes, sir.
And this tall man wasn't just standing up, he was actually leaning towards the man in the back row.
He was leaning forward.
Okay, so he wasn't just standing straight up and down.
He was standing straight up and leaning forward slightly. Yes.
Okay. When you saw this, you became alarmed.
Yes, sir.
When you saw what you saw and you heard what you heard, you became so alarmed that you actually nudged your husband,
Yes, sir.
the off-duty deputy, to get his attention because you were concerned about what was going on.
I could tell that there was people talking, so I nudged his to get his attention in that direction. Yes.
And you heard another statement by Mr. Oulson, right? You heard a statement to the effect of, a statement that contained the words, "a rude old man."
Yes, sir.
And that was raised and agitated as well.
If I wrote it in there, I'd.
Now, you told the prosecutor that you really didn't know what Mrs. Oulson was doing, but you told me you know, number one, that she was looking at her husband.
She was in next to him. Yes.
But I mean, looking at him as opposed to facing the movie screen, not paying attention to him. I mean, she was looking at him, watching what he's doing, right? Is that right?
Yes.
Now, you got the impression that Mrs. Oulson was trying to get Mr. Oulson to leave,
I kind of got that impression. Yes.
like pulling him to get out of there, right?
I don't know that I ever seen her pulling him, but I just got the impression that they were going to go sit somewhere else.
And it was Mrs. Oulson that was trying to get Mr. Oulson to leave.
I just assumed that they were going to go sit somewhere else.
And when you say assume, in this sort of arena, it's a dangerous thing, right?
I'm sorry.
So let's talk about what you saw. Number one, we already know you saw Mr. Oulson standing up, leaning slightly into the rope.
Objection, asked and answered.
I haven't. Okay. Leaning forward, agitated, loud, making at least two statements, one with the F-bomb. Mrs. Oulson was looking at him. Tell me physically what you saw that made you assume that they were going to leave, or that Mrs. Oulson was trying to get Mr. Oulson to leave?
When she started standing up,
Okay. So she seemed to you like she was trying to coax him out of there?
that they were going to leave.
Okay. Now you hear Mr. Oulson, you hear Mr. Reeves exclaim, "You're not going to do this," then the gun goes off, right?
Yes, sir.
After it's over, you go with your husband to where Mr. Reeves is. He has the gun on his leg, right?
I didn't initially walk over where my husband was.
Okay, you waited till your husband got over there and made sure everything was safe.
I tried to call 911, but I had no service. So when I couldn't get through to 911, I walked over to where he was.
Okay, and so afterwards, Mr. Reeves expresses that he hopes that Mr. Oulson's going to be all right, right?
Yes.
You didn't hear Mr. Reeves say anything about popcorn, right?
About what?
Throwing popcorn or anything like that. Mr. Reeves never said that.
Not right now that I remember hearing.
Okay. And you certainly didn't write in your statement, right?
Okay.
You didn't give it in the interview. So, at this point as you're sitting here, do you remember somehow that Mr. Reeves said that?
No, sir.
Okay. Because he didn't say that, right?
I don't know if he did or not.
All right, so move on.
You were standing very close to him after this happened, right? Within a few seats, you could hear what everybody was saying, right?
There was a lot going on and people moving and just looking at other stuff.
Okay. But you heard Mr. Reeves talk about,
Objection, hearsay.
Response? You want to approach?
sure. You heard Mr. Reeves express concern for Mr. Oulson.
Yes, sir.
But at no time did you hear Mr. Reeves utter the words, "throw popcorn at me," right?
No, sir.
Or anything having to do with the word popcorn in it, period.
Not that I heard him say no.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, may I have a moment just to find something?
You may.
Were you sitting right next to this defendant?
No, sir.
All right, were there people between you and this defendant?
Yes, sir.
Okay. At the time of the shooting, were you where the defendant was, or were you in your seat?
In my seat.
Okay. Who went over to the defendant first?
My husband.
And that was after the shooting.
Yes, sir.
Did you go behind your husband at some point?
Yes, sir.
And had the shooting been over already?
Yes, sir.
So it's possible that you may not have heard what the defendant stated immediately after the shooting.
Yes, sir.
You were asked questions about Mr. Oulson standing and then leaning.
Yes, sir.
Was his entire body, meaning really his whole body, leaning over as if to attack the defendant?
No, sir.
Then you testified on cross-examination that he was standing, but he was just kind of leaning.
Yes, sir.
Okay, would that be, I mean, the way that I just moved, would that be an example of just leaning?
Yes, sir.
Now, do you recall why it was that you thought they were leaving the theater?
I don't recall. I just,
Would it refresh your memory if I showed you a previous statement? May I approach the witness?
Can I see the statement, Your Honor?
Yes, it's, I think it's the deposition, page 26.
I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Lines, it's like 17 to the end of the page.
Your Honor, I didn't hear the question. I apologize.
If she recalled why it was that she felt as though they were leaving. May I approach the witness?
What was her answer? She did not recall?
Correct, and then I asked if it would refresh her memory if she looked at a statement. If you could read this is page 26, just read the entire block. See if that refreshes your memory about why you believe that they were leaving the theater. Does that refresh your memory?
yes, sir.
Okay, so what was it about Nicole Oulson that led you to believe that they were possibly going to leave the theater?
She had her purse.
Okay, so in other words, you didn't see her standing in front of Chad and waving and screaming. It was because you believe she had her purse with her.
Yes.
And I think you testified to this with Mr. Michaels. You were making an assumption.
Yes.
Okay, so you don't know for sure. That's just what you're guessing, so to speak.
Yes, sir.
May I have a moment, Your Honor?
You may.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just follow up.
Go ahead.
All right. Now, Mr. Rosenwasser bent a little bit at the waist and asked you if you know, that's how far Mr. Oulson was over, right?
Yes, sir.
When you're talking about distance, are you talking about somebody that's Mr. Rosenwasser's height, my height, or Mr. Oulson's height?
I don't remember exactly how tall he was. I just knew he was taller than his wife.
Okay. Now, the prosecutor talked to you about a prior statement you made, which was a deposition you gave, remember?
Yes, sir.
And you got to read that page that he showed you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you told us that Mrs. Oulson had her purse on her shoulder, right?
I don't remember it to this day, but if that's what the statement says,
Well, do you need your recollection refreshed? Would it help you to read it?
I read it.
Okay. So you remember you said that? It was
Yes,
on her
sir.
shoulder? Excuse me?
Was it in her hand or on her shoulder?
Here, let me let you look at this again. Sounds like you're a little confused. Page 26. Same page. May I approach, Your Honor? All right. It's towards that bottom part.
It was on her shoulder.
Okay. So your testimony then was it was on her shoulder.
Yes, sir.
And in terms of her hands, you don't know where they were.
No, sir.
So you don't know if they were trying to hold him back, right?
I did not see. I feel it. I did not see her holding him back.
Well, you don't know where her hands were, though. Do you?
I could see him though.
Okay.
And
Do you know if her hands were around his waist?
No, sir.
Do you know if her hand was reaching up, tapping
I
him?
check. This is beyond the scope.
I'll overrule.
Did you see her hand reaching up, tapping him? Her left hand?
No, sir.
No further questions. Thank you, Your Honor.
Anything further? You may.
I can just ask a few questions based on Mr. Michaels' questions.
Okay.
You indicated that you did have an opportunity to see Mr. Oulson standing
Yes.
and popcorn flying and then the shot.
Yes, sir.
Objection leading.
Did you see at any point Nicole Oulson in front of Chad Oulson?
No, sir.
I don't have any further questions.
Thank you. May this witness be released?
She is on standby but may be released.
Okay. Ms. Hamilton, you're free to go, but if you get a call to come back, I need you to come back, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a perfect time for a lunch break. Remember my instructions during the recess: no research, no talking about the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else. You can leave your notes in your seat. And again, if you're going out to lunch, just go straight out. My reason for that, I'm trying to avoid you guys milling about in the courtroom where there's witnesses and folks. So that's my purpose for that. So let's be back at 1 o'clock and we'll get started then. Any questions? Y'all good? All right, we'll see you back at 1 o'clock. Thank you.